June 22, 1945. 14 hours. United States 10th Army Processing Center, Central Okinawa. The air inside the canvas tent is stifling, a heavy soup of humidity, antiseptic, and the sharp, chemical tang of developing fluid. There is no screaming here, only the rhythmic thump-hiss of a heavy rubber stamp hitting paper, and the mechanical clack-whir of a shutter. Hanako Sato, 22, formerly of the Himeyuri Nursing Corps, stands frozen. She is filthy, her uniform torn, her skin stained with cave mud and dried blood. In front of her sits a young American corporal, chewing gum, looking bored. He does not beat her. He does not yell. He points to a small black square of ink. "Thumb," he says, miming the motion. "Right, here." Hanako hesitates. The propaganda told her they would be devils. It told her to choose Gyokusai, the shattering of the jewel, over capture. But this is not torture. This is administration. She presses her thumb down. The cool black ink coats her skin. The corporal grabs her wrist. His touch is impersonal, firm, like a factory worker handling a part, and rolls her digit onto a crisp, white index card. PMG form number 1. Her unique swirl of ridges is captured forever. She stares at it. She's no longer a spirit of the emperor. She's becoming a file number. If you enjoy this historical immersion, consider subscribing and commenting where you are watching from. 3 weeks earlier, the caves of Itoman, southern Okinawa. The air in the coral cave tasted of limestone dust, gangrene, and the metallic copper scent of old blood. It was dark, save for the flickering light of a single oil lamp that threw dancing, grotesque shadows against the wet walls. Hanako Sato knelt in the muck, her nurse's apron stiff with dried fluids. Below her, a boy no older than 16, a conscript from the Boeitai, Okinawa Home Guard, gasped for air. His chest was a ruin of shrapnel. "Water," he croaked. Hanako reached for her canteen. It was light, empty. She mimed pouring anyway, wetting his cracked lips with a drop of her own saliva on her finger. It was a pathetic gesture, but the medical supplies were gone. The morphine ampules had run out 2 days ago. Outside, the earth shook. Thump, thump. The rhythmic concussion of American artillery walking up the ridge was closer than an hour ago. "Sato-san," a voice hissed from the shadows. It was Lieutenant Tanaka. He sat slumped against a stalagmite, his uniform tunic unbuttoned, nursing a shattered arm. In his good hand, he held a spherical object, a Type 99 hand grenade, the late war ceramic variant, looking like a crude pottery jar. "It is time," Tanaka said, his voice hollow. "The Americans are at the cave mouth. You know the orders. Gyokusai. The shattered jewel. To break rather than surrender." Hanako's stomach twisted into a knot of cold iron. She looked at the grenade. To pull the pin, strike the fuse against the wall, and hold it against her chest. That was what the leaflet said. That was what the schoolmaster had taught. If they take you, the women will be violated, then butchered. Are they truly there?" Hanako asked, her voice trembling. "I heard the flamethrowers," Tanaka whispered. "The dragon breath. Better this way." Hanako looked back at the dying boy. If she died now, he died alone in the dark. But if she waited, the monsters would come. She imagined them as the posters depicted, red-skinned giants with fangs. Suddenly, the shelling stopped. The silence was louder than the explosions. From the cave entrance, 50 yards up the winding tunnel, a voice echoed down. It wasn't a scream of rage. It was amplified, distorted by a loudspeaker. "Detekoi! Detekoi! Come out! Come out!" The Japanese was accented, strange but intelligible. Tanaka gripped the ceramic grenade tighter. Don't listen, he snarled. Demon magic. Come here, Sato. We do it together. Hanako stood up. Her legs felt like lead. She looked at the lieutenant, then at the tunnel darkness leading up. The cognitive dissonance hammered in her skull, the duty to die against the biological imperative to breathe. Then, a sound drifted down. Not a flamethrower, not a gunshot. The sound of a chocolate bar wrapper being torn open, and a casual American voice saying, "Hold your fire, Baker. I see movement." They weren't screaming. They were talking. Hanako took a step back from Tanaka. She couldn't finish the sentence. Coward! Tanaka raised the grenade, struggling to strike the fuse cap. Hanako didn't wait. She turned and ran, not toward the back of the cave where the darkness waited, but up toward the terrifying alien light of the entrance. The transition was violent. One moment, Hanako was shrouded in the suffocating, rot-scented gloom of the limestone. The next, she was blinded by the white-hot intensity of the Okinawan sun. She stumbled out of the fissure, her hands thrust high above her head, fingers splayed wide as if to catch the air. Her lungs heaved, gasping in the humidity which, compared to the cave, tasted sweet and shockingly clean. Hold it right there. The shout was guttural, English, and close. Hanako froze. Her eyes streamed with tears, reacting to the sudden glare. Through the watery blur, shapes coalesced. Green shapes, angular helmets covered in netting. She blinked rapidly, her vision clearing enough to see the black, unblinking eye of death staring directly at her chest. The muzzle of an M1 Garand rifle. The soldier holding it was crouching behind a low rock wall, his cheek pressed against the wooden stock. He was young, his face smeared with grease, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He did not look like a demon. He looked terrified. "Hondo Uppu!" "Hands up," another soldier yelled. He stood to the right, holding a Thompson submachine gun. His Japanese was clumsy, learned from a manual, but the intent was unmistakable. Behind her, from the depths of the cave, a muffled thud reverberated through the ground. Then silence. Lieutenant Tanaka had pulled the pin. The American rifleman flinched at the vibration, his finger tightening on the trigger guard. Hanako stopped breathing. She waited for the flash, the impact. This was it. The propaganda posters rushed through her mind, the butchery, the torture. But the rifle didn't fire. "Civilian," the rifleman shouted back over his shoulder. "Check her. Watch for wires." A third soldier emerged from the tall kunai grass. He approached warily, weapon lowered but ready. He gestured aggressively with his hand, a sweeping motion toward her waist. "Obi, open!" He pointed to the sash of her mampe trousers. They thought she had grenades strapped to her body. It was a valid fear. Many did. With trembling fingers, Hanako untied her sash. The fabric fell loose. She felt a burning shame, a heat that had nothing to do with the sun, rising up her neck. She stood exposed in her undergarments, filthy and emaciated. The soldier scanned her waist, then her torn tunic. He nodded to the rifleman. "Clear. She's clean." The tension in the air snapped like a cut wire. The rifleman lowered the M1 Garand, flipping the safety catch inside the trigger guard with an audible metallic click. That sound, mechanical, crisp, final, signaled that she was no longer a target. She was cargo. The soldier closest to her grabbed her shoulder. His grip was not gentle, but it wasn't the brutal strike she expected. He spun her around, patting down her back and sides with efficient, impersonal swiftness. "Move out," he grunted, shoving her toward a waiting line of other survivors sitting in the dirt. Hanako fell to her knees among them. She touched her own face. she was still alive. The Americans hadn't shot her. They hadn't ravaged her. They had checked her for weapons and cleared her. She looked back at the cave mouth, a black maw in the hillside. Tanaka was gone. She was here. And for the first time, the absolute certainty of her worldview began to crack. The vehicle that swallowed them was a green beast of steel and canvas. It was a GMC Siki-Yakuabiyu, a deuce and a half. Its six-wheel drive churning through the thick, red Okinawan mud that had immobilized the Japanese retreat. Hanako was shoved up into the truck bed. She landed on a wooden bench already crowded with other women and elderly men. There was no conversation. The silence was heavy, broken only by the roar of the engine coughing to life and the grinding of gears as the driver shifted. As the truck lurched forward, Hanako gripped the wooden slat of the siding. The vibration rattled her teeth. The smell was overpowering, not of death, but of unburnt fuel, heated rubber, and raw exhaust. It was the smell of industry. They joined a convoy snaking south on a widened dirt road. What Hanako saw through the open back of the canvas cover stopped her breath. The road was choked with traffic. Not foot soldiers marching in ragged columns, but machines. Endless lines of jeeps, weapons carriers, and bulldozers clearing debris with terrifying efficiency. To the sides of the road, mountains of supplies rose like man-made hills. She saw crates of ammunition stacked 10 feet high, exposed to the rain, uncared for. She saw drums of gasoline rolling loose. She saw a soldier sitting on a crate of rations, eating from a tin and then, casually, without a second thought, tossing the half-finished can into the mud. Hanako stared at the discarded tin. In the caves, men had killed each other for a handful of dry rice. Here, the enemy threw food away because they were full. They lied, a voice whispered in her head. The instructors lied. They had been told the Americans were soft, that their supply lines were overstretched, that one determined push would break their will. But looking at this river of steel and surplus, Hanako realized the truth. This wasn't a war of warriors. It was a war of factories. The soldier guarding the rear of the truck, a young man with a helmet tilted back, noticed her staring at the convoy. He didn't rifle butt her. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, and lit one, shielding the flame from the wind. He exhaled a cloud of blue smoke that mixed with the diesel fumes. He looked bored. That boredom was more terrifying to Hanako than any anger. It meant that capturing them, transporting them, conquering them, it was just a job. It was a Tuesday afternoon commute. The truck hit a pothole, throwing Hanako against the shoulder of an old woman next to her. The woman didn't flinch. She was staring at the floorboards, catatonic. Hanako looked back out at the endless line of trucks stretching to the horizon. The magnitude of the deception crushed her chest. There was no divine wind coming. There was only this, the relentless, grinding gears of a machine that could not be stopped. The truck stopped in a wide fenced enclosure. The ground here was hard-packed coral, white and glaring. As the tailgate dropped, the shouts began again. Men right, women left, move. Hanako was herded toward a long, open-sided tent. The air smelled sharp, a chemical sting that watered the eyes. Inside, the process was industrial. A line of women moved forward, stopping at stations manned by corpsmen wearing masks and gloves. At the front of the line, a soldier pointed to the clothes of an elderly woman. Off. Take off. The woman hesitated, clutching her collar. The soldier did not strike her. He simply sighed, stepped forward, and firmly pulled the fabric. It ripped with a dry tear. Hanako's turn came. She stood before a tall American with red hair on his arms. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her scalp, then her clothes. He gestured to a pile of discarded rags on the ground. "Clothes," he said. With numb fingers, Hanako stripped. The shame was a physical burning sensation, radiating from her chest. In the village, modesty was iron. Here, she was livestock. She stood naked, shivering not from cold, but from exposure, surrounded by strangers. She closed her eyes, waiting for the hands to grab her. Instead, she felt cold metal against her skin. It was a nozzle, a long tin cylinder with a plunger handle. The corpseman pumped it. Whump hiss. A cloud of white powder blasted into her hair. Whump hiss. Down her back. Whump hiss. Under her arms. She choked, coughing as the dust filled her nose and mouth. Poison, she thought. This is how they kill us. Like insects. She waited for the burning, for her lungs to seize. But there was no pain. Only the dry, chalky feel of the powder coating her sweat-slicked skin. The corpsman wasn't leering. He was working. He pumped the duster with the rhythm of a man painting a fence. "Next," he grunted, shoving a bar of yellow soap and a rough towel into her hands. Hanako stumbled forward, covered in the ghostly white dust. She looked at her arms, the fleas that had tormented her for weeks in the caves. The lice that carried typhus were dead or dying. The powder was DDT. She looked around. Hundreds of women, white as geishas, but naked as newborns, stood in the processing line. The Americans were systematically destroying the parasites that the Imperial Army had been powerless to stop. She clutched the bar of soap. It smelled artificial, sweet. This was the violation? To be cleaned? The confusion was dizzying. They had stripped her of her clothes, yes. But in doing so, they had stripped away the filth of the war. She felt lighter, and that terrified her more than the dirt. The tent was small, hot, and smelled of tobacco and damp canvas. A folding table sat in the center. Behind it sat a man who looked like her brother. He had the same dark eyes, the same straight black hair, the same bone structure. But he wore the olive-drab wool shirt of a technical sergeant in the U.S. Army. Hanako sat on the stool, her hands gripping the knees of the oversized green trousers she had been issued. She steeled herself. Name, rank, unit. Nothing else. They would torture her now. This was where the fingernails were pulled. "Name?" the man asked. He spoke Japanese, not the clumsy, barked commands of the soldiers outside, but fluent native Japanese. It was slightly archaic, perhaps the dialect of a parent who had left the homeland decades ago. But it was perfect. Hanako stared at him, her mouth clamped shut. The sergeant sighed. He didn't reach for a whip. He reached for a pack of Lucky Strikes. "Do you want a cigarette?" he asked, extending the pack. Hanako shook her head. "Suit yourself," he said, lighting one. He picked up a fountain pen, a sleek black Parker with a gold nib, and uncapped it. He adjusted the metal clip on his clipboard. "Look, miss, I have 300 people to interview today. If you are a civilian, you go to Camp Koza. If you are military, you go to the stockade. It is better for you if you tell me." "I am Himeyuri," she whispered. "The Student Nursing Corps. Technically, military attached." The sergeant nodded and wrote something down. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was incredibly loud in the small tent. Scritch, scratch. Her life was being transcribed. "Unit?" "Himeyuri Field Hospital," she said, waiting for the blow. She had admitted to aiding the enemy. "Okay," he said, writing again. "Date of birth?" Hanako blinked. "Why?" "Records," he said, not looking up. "We need to know who we are feeding. And if you don't make it, We need to know who to tell when the war is over. When the war is over. He spoke of it as a certainty, a time on a calendar, not the end of the world. July 12th, 1923, she said. He wrote it down. He didn't ask about the location of the 32nd Army HQ. He didn't ask about the cave defenses. He asked for her village prefecture. Is that all? She asked, confused. For now, the sergeant said, capping his pen. He looked at her, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second. You're safe here, Nissan, sister. Go get some food. He used the familial term. It hit her harder than a slap. This traitor, this enemy, had shown her more courtesy in 5 minutes than the imperial officers had shown her in 3 months. She stood up, her legs shaky. The interrogation wasn't a torture session. It was a census. Outside the interrogation tent, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the coral. The humidity remained, a thick, wet blanket draped over the camp. A soldier stood by a wooden crate filled with small manila cardstock rectangles. As Hanako approached, he didn't speak. He reached into the box, pulled out a tag, and held it up. It had a thin wire loop. He threaded the wire through the buttonhole of her oversized shirt, twisting the ends with a quick, practiced motion. It felt heavy, though it weighed nothing. She looked down. PW 32098. It was done. She was no longer Sato Hanako. She was prisoner of war number 32098. The tag fluttered against her chest like a dead leaf. She was shuffled forward to the next station, the mess line. The smell here was different. Savory, salty, and incredibly rich. It made her mouth water so violently it hurt her jaw. A mess cook, his white apron stained with grease, handed her a small, olive-drab box. It was wax-dipped cardboard. K-ration. Supper unit. Hanako found a spot on the ground, away from the others. She sat cross-legged, staring at the box. Inside, there was a small tin can, a packet of biscuits, and a stick of gum. She picked up the tin. It was warm. With the small metal key provided, she peeled back the lid. The strip of metal coiled up, revealing a solid block of processed pork and egg. In the caves of Itomen, they had eaten raw sugarcane, and at the end, the leather from their belts. Lieutenant Tanaka had died with a stomach full of nothing but bile and pride. Hanako dipped a biscuit into the meat and brought it to her lips. The flavor exploded in her mouth. Salt, fat, protein. It was overwhelming, almost nauseating in its richness. Tears sprang to her eyes, spilling over and dripping onto the manila tag. She chewed slowly, sobbing silently as she ate. This was the ultimate weapon. Not the flamethrower, not the tank, not the airplane. This, the fact that the Americans could package meat in a tin can, ship it 5,000 miles across the ocean, and feed it to the people they had just conquered. She looked around. Hundreds of women were eating, their faces buried in the wax boxes. The silence of the meal was absolute. They were eating the enemy's bread, and with every bite, the imperial spirit died a little more, replaced by the warm, shameful comfort of survival. The sun had set. The processing tent was now illuminated by hanging electric bulbs powered by a distant, humming generator. The light was harsh, yellow, and threw sharp shadows against the canvas walls. Hanako stood in the final line. This was the place from her nightmare. The scene she had witnessed in the moments before the story began. The sound was the first thing that registered. Thump, hiss, thump, hiss. It was the sound of a heavy rubber stamp hitting an ink pad, then paper. It was the heartbeat of the American military machine. She stepped up to the wooden table. The corporal sitting there was young, his sleeves rolled up, revealing a wristwatch with a luminous dial. He looked exhausted, his eyes glazed over with the monotony of the task. He didn't look at her as a person. He looked at her hands. "Left hand," he muttered, pointing to the black square of the ink pad. Hanako hesitated. In Japanese culture, the thumbprint, the bow-in, was a signature of honor, used for solemn contracts. Here, it felt like a criminal indictment. "Come on, honey, I don't have all night," the corporal sighed. He reached out, grabbing her wrist. His skin was warm, his grip firm but completely devoid of malice. It was the grip of a factory worker handling a component. He pressed her thumb into the cool, wet sponge of the ink pad. Squish. He moved her hand to the white cardstock of PMG form number 1. With a practiced rolling motion, nail to nail, he transferred her identity onto the paper. Hanako stared at the black swirl on the white card. That was her. That whirl of ridges was the only thing left of Sato Hanako that wasn't covered in mud or shame. It was now property of the United States War Department. "Next station. Photo," the corporal said, already wiping his hands on a rag. She was shoved to the right. Another soldier handed her a black slate board with white chalk numbers written on it. 32298. "Hold it under your chin. Look at the lens." Hanako lifted the board. It was heavy. She looked into the glass eye of the box camera on the tripod. Behind it, the photographer chewed gum, his jaw working rhythmically. "Steady," he said. Hanako tried to summon the face of a proud daughter of the empire. She tried to look defiant, but she was full of American pork, wearing American clothes, standing in an American tent. Flash. The bulb popped, a blinding explosion of white light that left purple spots dancing in her vision. The shutter clicked. A mechanical guillotine. Her soul hadn't been stolen by a demon. It had been captured by Kodak. She blinked, lowering the board. The soldier took it from her and wiped the number away with a wet cloth, ready to write the next one. She had been erased, replaced, and filed in the span of 10 seconds. The flash blindness faded, leaving Hanako blinking in the yellow electric light. The photographer waved her away, already focusing his lens on the next woman. She walked to the end of the long table. There, the journey ended. Not with a bang, but with a shuffle of paper. A clerk, an older sergeant with reading glasses perched on his nose, took the PMG form number 1 from the corporal. He also took the second copy of her index card, the one with the fresh black fingerprint. Hanako watched, unable to look away. This piece of paper held her name, her birth date, her village, and her face. It was her new spirit tablet. On the desk sat a long, narrow wooden box. It was simple, battered pine, filled with hundreds of other white cards standing upright in tight rows. The sergeant checked the number on her card, 32298, and flipped through the tabs in the box. Click-clack. His fingers danced over the files. He found the spot. He slid Hanako's card into the gap between 2 others. It fit perfectly. He tapped the top of the cards to align them, and just like that, she disappeared into the collective history of the war. "All done," the sergeant said, not unkindly. "Go. Sleep." He pointed to the exit. Hanako stepped out of the tent and into the night. The humidity had broken slightly, leaving a cool breeze coming off the Pacific. Before her lay the camp, a sprawling city of canvas tents and makeshift shelters stretching as far as she could see. It was quiet, not the ominous silence of an ambush, but the silence of exhaustion. 10,000 people were sleeping here. 10,000 people who were supposed to be dead. She found a patch of dry grass near a family from Naha. They were asleep, huddled together under a U.S. Army wool blanket. Hanako sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. She touched the wire tag on her buttonhole. 3298. In the cave, Lieutenant Tanaka had offered her death as the only honorable exit. He had promised that to surrender was to become a ghost, a non-entity. He was wrong. She looked back at the processing tent, glowing like a paper lantern in the dark. Inside that box, in that wooden file, she existed. The Americans hadn't erased her. They had cataloged her. They had turned the chaos of her sacrifice into a line of data. She lay back on the grass. Above her, the moon hung over Okinawa, the same moon that shone on the caves of Itomen. But it looked different now. It didn't look like a flag. It just looked like a rock in the sky. Hanako closed her eyes. The smell of the antiseptic soap on her skin was strong, masking the scent of the earth. For the first time in 3 months, she didn't listen for the sound of artillery. She listened to the rhythmic, mechanical thumping of the stamp in the tent behind her. Thump, hiss, thump, hiss. It was the heartbeat of a new world. And she was still in it.